When we say rationalize denominator, we mean that at the bottom of the fraction, we cannot have an I, we cannot have imaginary numbers, and we cannot have radicals. If we do have radicals, make sure that everything is simplified. So taking a look at example number 9, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by negative 6 plus 3i. So negative 6 plus 3i. I basically took a look at the bottom of my fraction. The sign in between them, I changed it. From a minus, I wrote it as a plus. Nothing else. Okay, so now let me multiply the top. We know how to multiply. Let me distribute the 3. So I'm just working the top of the fraction right now. I get negative 18 plus 9i. I just distribute the 3. Now let me distribute the 4i. That gives me negative 24i plus 12i squared. Once again, I'm just working the top of the fraction. The cool thing is that the 12i squared at the end, we know I squared is negative 1, so 12i squared basically simplifies to negative 12. Looking at the like numbers, negative 18 minus 12, that gives me negative 30. Now looking at the i's, 9 minus 24, that gives me negative 15i. Okay. Now let's take a look at the bottom. I'm going to distribute my negative 6 to the second parentheses. That gives me 36 minus 18i. Now let me distribute the negative 3i. That gives me plus 18i minus 9i to the second. Two things that happen at the bottom. One, the middle terms, negative 18 plus 18, they cancel out. Another thing, my last term, negative 9i squared, we know I to the second power is negative 1. So negative 9i squared, that becomes plus 9. So at the bottom, 36 plus 9, that gives me 45. All right, I'm almost done. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I look at my numbers. I'm looking at the whole numbers. If I can simplify them by the same thing, then I will do so. I'm going to divide them all, in this case, by 15. That gives me negative 2 minus I over 3. The way I will type this, I'm just going to go negative 2 minus I. I'm going to use parentheses on the top of the fraction because there's a plus or minus sign all over 3. Take a look at question number 10. I see the sign in between, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by negative 10 plus 7i, top and bottom. So now on the top, let me distribute the 4i. That gives me negative 40i plus 28i to the second. 28i to the second basically becomes negative 28. When I write it here, I'm just going to say negative 28 minus 40i. I move things around just because we do the real part before the imaginary part. Now let's take a look at the bottom. Negative 10 times negative 10, that gives me 100. Negative 10 times 7i, that gives me negative 70i. I distribute the negative 10. Now let me distribute the negative 7i. That gives me plus 70i minus 49i to the second. The middle terms cancel out. Minus 49i squared becomes plus 49. So when I add my numbers, I get 149. When I take a look at my big numbers, there's nothing I can divide them all by. I have to divide every number by such thing. So I cannot simplify it anymore. Let's take a look at question number 11. Radicals work similar to imaginary numbers. To get rid of the radical, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 6 plus 8 radical 2. Just change the sign in between them. Now on the top, let me distribute the top. So let me distribute the 2 first. I get 12 plus 16 radical 2. Now let me distribute the radical 3. I get 6 radical 3 plus 8 radical 6. I look at my numbers. If I have any radicals, simplify radicals if possible. If I can combine like terms, do combine like terms if possible. In this case, nothing can be done. So let me just copy 12 plus 16 radical 2 plus 6 radical 3 plus 8 radical 6. I cannot simplify anymore. Now let me take a look at the bottom. Let me distribute the 6 first. So it gives me 36 plus 48 radical 2. Let me distribute the negative 8 radical 2. So it gives me negative 48 radical 2 minus 64 radical 4. Multiply whole numbers with whole numbers, radicals with radicals. Nice thing is that numbers in the center cancel out. The radical that I do have at the bottom becomes a whole number. Square root of 4 is 2. So I see that at the bottom, negative 64 times 2, I have negative 128. I multiply those out. So now when I look at the bottom, I have 36 minus 28. 36 minus 128, I get negative 92. When I take a look at all my big numbers, my whole numbers, I can divide them all by 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. That gives me 6 plus 8 radical 2 plus 3 radical 3 plus 4 radical 6 over negative 46. I'm okay with having negatives at the bottom. Some teachers don't like negatives at the bottom. In my case, I am. Okay, the way we type this, because the top has plus or minuses in it, make sure you use parentheses. So I'm going to go 6 plus 8 radical 2 plus 3 radical 3 plus 4 radical 6. Close my parentheses from the top over negative 46. My last example, let's take a look at here. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 5 minus 5 radical 2. I change the plus sign to a minus sign. So on the top, let me distribute the 4. That gives me 20 minus 20 radical 2. Nothing I can do, so I'm just going to leave it as 20 minus 20 radical 2. Now at the bottom, let me distribute the 5 first. So that gives me 25 minus 25 radical 2. Now let me distribute the 5 radical 2. That gives me plus 25 radical 2 minus 25 radical 4. The 2 terms in the center cancel out. Radical 4, it becomes a whole number. So it looks like negative 50. 25 minus 50, that gives me negative 25. Let me simplify my numbers. I'm going to divide everything by 5. 4 minus 4 radical 2 over negative 5.